I'm here to talk about dynamic frequency selection. Quickly, I'm Dave Coleman, Director of Product Marketing for Extreme. Always need more Twitter followers, so there I am, Mr. Multipath. Also co-author of this book. Here's my co-author right here, David Westcott. He never makes it to these events. And quick plug, I am also doing another session to end the conference about writing for your Wi-Fi career. So I know some of you like to leave early, but you're going to have to cancel your flights and make sure you make that event. So before I get started, quick show of hands. How many people were here, were at the Prague event? Okay, about 10 people. So you've seen this presentation. However, you should know that it is the same presentation, but I've updated it. So I've updated it with some new information. So very quickly, you guys all know this, channel reuse. The primary goal of channel reuse is to prevent co-channel interference and reduce airtime consumption and isolate frequency domains, which is just a fancy way of isolating channels. We know we always have to do this. We know we only always have 3 channels. Hopefully everybody in this room knows this for 2.4 gigahertz, but we also know that RF doesn't stop. So it's almost impossible to prevent CCI in the 2.4 band. Additionally, everybody should know that it's not usually APs that are the number one cause of co-channel interference, which is simply, really should be called co-channel cooperation because it's just Wi-Fi working the way it's supposed to work. Radios backing off because only one can talk at one time on the half-duplex medium. But it's not static, it's always changing, and the reason is because clients are the number one cause of CCI. They move around and they cause CCI. So 2.4, pretty much impossible. You have to live with it. And that's why I always like to say that 2.4 is a best effort band. Now, 5 gigahertz, you can actually prevent CCI with some really good design. This little diagram here is a little misleading because it's linear, but you can see right here, channel 36 doesn't repeat itself until 8 or 9 APs. And also remember, there's also walls. So with proper, if you're using all the DFS channels, and you have all the DFS channels and you're using the bulk of them, and you don't have your APs cranked up at full power, you can probably prevent CCI or at least limit it, okay? But you need the DFS channels, okay? And other than just having Uni 1 and Uni 3, you need the DFS channels. And in case you don't know, what exactly are the DFS channels? The DFS channels are simply right here, everything that you see in yellow, and they're the Uni 2A and the Uni 2C channels. Now, what are the DFS channels all about? Well, hopefully most of you know it, but I always like to say the purpose of the DFS channels is radar avoidance. We're not allowed, Wi-Fi is not allowed to interfere with weather radar and military radar. And by the way, it's not just Wi-Fi that's not allowed to interfere, it's other kinds of frequency transmissions. This is a license-free band, and other kinds of RF is not allowed to interfere with the weather and military radar as well. So there has to be a mechanism to prevent interference, potential interference with radar, especially outdoor, obviously, but it can indoor as well. So there's rules for this. And there's rules that vary from region to region in terms of what channels you can use, how much power you can use, and it even varies a little bit about some of the back-off times here that we're going to talk about right here. And once again, if you'll note that third bullet right there, please note that DFS requirements don't just apply to Wi-Fi radios. And I've seen radar due to weather. I've seen it due to planes. Seen a lot of it due to boats. Amsterdam, in particular, has a lot of docks there and a lot of shipping there. See a lot of radar there, and we'll talk more about that. So there's a little bit of history to dynamic frequency selection. It was really initiated first by the Europeans and the ERC. They did not want Wi-Fi interfering with radar, okay? The United States actually followed later on, and the FCC basically started certifying radios so that they wouldn't interfere with the radar a little bit later. You know, there's this hierarchy of frequency management across the world, and usually things seem to start in the United States, and then they find their way into other countries. They all talk to each other, all these regional frequency management organizations. That being said, this was actually an example where it was the other way around, where this kind of got started with the Europeans first and then found its way over here. The rules and regulations found its way over here as well. Now, of course, there's the IEEE, and we all know the IEEE makes the communication standards, including the 802.11 standards. So while the FCC and the Europeans as well were coming up with strict regulations for radar avoidance, there had to be a standard on how all this operates with Wi-Fi radios. And that first standard was 802.11h. And it actually proposed two mechanisms for this. One was dynamic frequency selection, and the other one was transmit power control. So let's talk about transmit power control first, very briefly. And almost all APs support this today, but initially this was just transmit power control, was designed specifically for 5 gigahertz channels. Now we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, but actually TPC is used for other reasons now. But initially the whole goal of transmit power control was to protect against the Earth exploration, I gotta get the words out, satellite services. Okay, and interfering with that. And all it was is if a radar event, or if there was some sort of, especially this was mainly for outdoors, to protecting EESS, an AP could command clients to power down and match the power of the AP specifically, okay? So the AP might power down, the clients might power down at the same time. This was mostly for outdoor. Okay, mostly for outdoor. Okay, there is another use case for this, and the other use case is that third bullet right there, and that is that a lot of people like to turn it on their wireless networks. And by the way, this can now be used in 2.4 gigahertz, so all radios do this pretty much. It's to power down clients to match the AP's radio for a balanced link. So I was actually in GT Hill's class, and he was talking about the fallacy of the balanced link, and we were actually talking about something else, and it's not necessarily to make sure that the APs can hear the clients. It's more about limiting the client power, so to avoid co-channel interference caused by client. So the main purpose of this isn't necessarily for a balanced link. The main purpose is very often you might have an AP that's transmitting only at like 5 milliwatts, but you have an iPhone that's transmitting at what, 16 dBm, and you want it to power down as well because those clients are actually going to be causing CCI as well. So this is actually a great way to limit CCI. Now the problem with this is that legacy clients may have problems with this, so just be warned. I think we all know this. Whenever you turn on certain features, it puts an IE in the beacon, and then legacy clients, they go and they crap out. So just be aware that sometimes when you turn on nerd knobs, it causes problems with legacy clients. So let's get into the main thing though, DFS. Wi-Fi radios have to be certified to detect radar and avoid interfering radar. Now, it's a little bit different in Europe, and it's a little bit different in the United States. Europeans have it actually are pretty lucky, and here's why. When a vendor submits their AP to get certified in Europe for just transmitting in general over in Europe, they also go through the DFS certification. So that means when a vendor's AP comes out, they can immediately start transmitting on the DFS channels in Europe. Not so much in the United States. And this is actually a pretty big problem because there's typically a 4 to 6 month backlog to get your APs certified to transmit on the DFS channels. So I work for Extreme, and we have other vendors in the room. When we have a new model AP, we submit it to the FCC, and then we get it certified to transmit on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. But then we have to go through a whole nother certification process for DFS, and I believe there's only like 1 or 2 labs that do this, and there's a 4 to 6 month backlog. So here's what happens. Initially, when the APs ship out in the United States, you can only transmit on these channels, Uni 1 and the Uni 3. And so the problem, and then of course later on, 4 months later, we get them certified for DFS, and then there's a firmware update, and then you can turn on the DFS channels. But that's the problem. The problem is, and I see this all the time, is that customers, they'll buy the new APs, they'll create a channel reuse plan using these channels, but they never turn on the DFS channels. So I can't tell you how many times I run into customer sites like that all the time, and like, why don't you have the DFS channels? And they go, what are the DFS channels? And they simply didn't know because they couldn't enable them when they first bought their APs. One other thing I'd like to say about this is a way that vendors like to do some marketing FUD against each other. So vendor X will say, hey, don't buy that vendor because they don't support DFS, okay? Well, they do, they just don't do yet. So if anybody tries to lay you on that come on, okay? So why is this puppy so sad? Because he didn't win the WiFiMetrix? So right about when 802.11n debuted in 2009, the FCC suspended DFS certification for Wi-Fi APs. And this was right about the same time I went to work for AeroHive about 10 plus years ago, and our brand new 802.11n APs were coming out, and we couldn't get them certified for DFS. And the reason is there was one naughty vendor that caused a little problem. I don't know the full story, but basically they had some outdoor APs that interfered with some radar near a military base. And that pissed off like 3 government agencies: the FCC, the FAA, the Department of Defense. So the FCC said, that's it. We're going to suspend DFS certification, and we're going to take another look at this. And they did. And I believe it was for about 2 years. But it was very frustrating because for about 2 years we couldn't transmit on DFS. And to make it even more frustrating is that APs and clients that predated it, 802.11a, that was before 802.11n, they actually supported DFS channels, but when N came out for like 2 years, there was no DFS. And that was a problem with every vendor. Now, it eventually sorted itself out, and the FCC said, okay, we took another look at it. And by the way, they're always changing these rules too, about not just DFS, but everything. But they sorted things out, and they restarted up DFS certification about 2 years later. Why is that important? Because occasionally, not very often, but every now and then, you might run into a very old legacy client device, 802.11a probably, 802.11n, that during that 2 year period just doesn't work with DFS, okay? So you might run into that, but it's kind of rare now. Pretty much now, all clients are out there will respond to channel switch announcements that we're going to talk about. So how does DFS work? Well, first of all, there is mechanisms that are absolutely defined both by the FCC, there's very specific rules, and also by the IEEE. Now, this is actually FCC definitions right here, and it defines what's called a master device and a client device. And a master device is usually an AP, but it could be a wireless LAN controller, okay? But it's any device that features radar detection controls and a coordinated system. And basically, it is in charge of all the other devices and making sure that all the other devices don't interfere with radar as well. So a client device, in other words, has to obey the master device and move when it's commanded to do a channel change. So it's usually it's going to be the APs that do the listening for the radar. That being said, client devices can listen for radar as well, and we'll talk about that, but it's optional. There's no mandate for that. There is an exception for that. I guess if you had an ad hoc network, and ad hoc is that if one of those devices would have to detect radar until the other one's connected to it, listen to change channels. But it's going to be the AP, okay? So bottom line, here's what happens. The AP is going to have to go through several different kind of mechanisms. So let me get some definitions out here first. First of all, you have what's called the channel availability check, the CAC. And it's a function where the master device, the AP, is basically listening to determine if it hears a radar pulse or a radar waveform. And there's like 5 or 6 of these waveforms. This slide right here, that's a screen capture of some really expensive radar simulation and testing equipment that is used in laboratory environments. And there is a set CAC time, a channel available check time, when it has to listen for the radar. And you're going to see here, it's dependent on the channels, and it's also dependent on the region. And there's also set defined thresholds on when it might hear a radar pulse before an AP and all its associated clients might have to make a change. And so this is actually straight out of some of the FCC documentation. There's 6 radar waveforms that are tested for DFS certification. 5 use a short pulse, 1 uses a long pulse. And then there's a minimum percentage of successful detection that it has to require during these repetitive tests. So I think if you can look at it, you'll see that it has to be able to detect these various pulses at least 80% of the time over X amount of repetitive testing. Okay, and so they put the APs through the ringers. And by the way, just so you know, this is not cheap for vendors. This costs us a lot of money to get this DFS certification. And as I mentioned, it's also usually a backlog as well. But the testing does vary by region. Now you'll note, I said there's 6 radar waveforms that the master device, the AP, has to listen for, but there's actually a 7th one as well. The APs don't have to listen for that, but I'm going to circle back to that because that could actually be a problem. So this is actually a spectrum analysis screen capture video of a radar waveform. So you can see it right here. And we have a 20 megahertz channel, so just wait for it. And we'll see a radar pulse in just a second. There it goes right there. Boom. Now what did you see happen right there? You saw that the AP stopped transmitting, or whatever device was that the AP stopped transmitting. And I know you can't see it yet, but in the bottom of that is a packet capture. In that packet capture, there's 2 action frames. And those action frames are actually being used to signal to the clients that, hey guys, we're all going to jump to a different channel. And we're going to do a little demo of that in a few minutes. Okay, so let's get more into this. So when an AP boots up for the first time, it's going to scan the channels. And let's say I'm an AP and I want to transmit on channel 60, okay, or let's make it channel 100. Well, you know what I have to do before I can start transmitting? I got to listen for 60 seconds. And then after 60 seconds, if I don't hear any of those 6 radar pulses, then I'll start beaconing out, okay? Now, clients are different. Clients what do clients normally do? They do passive scanning and active scanning. So can clients just go probing on every DFS channel? No, they can't. Okay, so initially they're going to have to do passive scanning, and they'll start transmitting when they hear a beacon frame from an AP. And when they hear that beacon frame, they're basically assuming, oh, okay, so the AP is transmitting, that means it's okay for me to transmit as well. Okay, so and that's actually pretty important because it has implications for things like voice that we'll hit towards the end of the presentation. I do want to point this out. Even though it's a 60-second channel availability check, that initial CAC, in Europe, for the TDWR channels of 120, 124, and 128, the rules are a little bit different. An AP has to listen for 10 full minutes before it can start transmitting. Now, and so I'll never forget, I like to tell this story. I was in my lab at my house one time, and I had an AP with European country code on it, and I had it on channel 120. And it wouldn't beacon, and it wasn't coming up. And in like 8 minutes, I was getting very upset. And then finally, I just did one of these moments, and I'm like, oh, it's working the way it's supposed. And sure enough, within 10 minutes, it started beaconing out. So it was obeying the European rules. So just be aware of that. Those 3 channels in Europe, they will not, an AP will not transmit for at least 10 minutes. It's a lot more strict on those 3 channels. So I have some new, you're going to see in this, for those of you that were in Prague, I have some new screenshots and some new slides. And here's one. I decided to take a look at some of these processes by looking at the log file of an AP. And this is an AP doing its initial CAC, its initial assessment. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see it 13, 28, 48. You can see on channel 60, it started its 60-second CAC time. And then it ends at the very end there at the top of the screen. Literally 1 minute later, you can see it's stopped, and then it starts transmitting out on channel 60. Okay? And all APs, all master devices have to abide by this. So first, there's the initial channel assessment. But what happens if there's actual radar is then actually detected? And once again, there's, those 6 different pulses. Basically, the AP, it's going to be the AP's job based on those thresholds right there and those 6 different types of pulses, that if it hears a radar pulse, it has to tell the clients, we got to move to a different channel. And that's basically what its job is. And there's actually a frame for this. It's called the channel switch announcement frame. And it's basically say, guys, we got to move. I'm on channel 100. Let's all move at the same time to channel 36. So let's talk about that. There's another term right here. It's the channel move time. How long do the AP and the clients have to move? It's actually 10 seconds. But what you're going to see here in the demo and on also some frame captures I have, it almost always happens in well under a second. Okay? But the rules and regulations say that everybody has to move within 10 seconds. Now, it's a frame that is used to inform the clients that they're going to have to move. Now, that's what the information element looks like. It basically has 3 fields that are important. There's 3 frames that are used that carry the channel switch announcement information. Action frames, beacon frames, and probe response frames. And they can all be used to carry the channel switch announcement information. And it's simply 3 fields right there: the switch mode, the channel number, and the switch count. So this is actually a packet capture right here of a very good channel switch announcement by one vendor. And they actually use 2 action frames to initially say, hey, we're moving to a new channel, and in this case, it looks like they're going to channel 40. They were on channel 64, and the AP's telling all the clients, we're going to go to channel 40. That information is relayed in the action frame, but also in beacon frames. And then that countdown right there is called the channel switch count. So this channel switch count is a number of targeted beacon transmission times before the actual channel jump. So if you go back right here, you can see it's basically in the initial action frame, it says, we're going to count down 8 beacons, and then they start the countdown. And then at the final beacon, they all jump, the AP and the client. And then if you see that, if you dig into the packet right here, if you see it starts with a value of 8, okay, of this channel switch count, and then at the end, the very last beacon will have a value of 1, and it's basically saying, we got it, after this beacon, we're all going, okay? We all got to move. Now, you also see in the frame the new channel number right there, in this case, channel 40. But then there's something called the channel switch mode. What is the channel switch mode? That is most vendors, you'll see almost always have this as a value of 1. And what that simply means is, as soon as the clients hear the channel, any of these channel switch announcement frames, they're told to shut up. In other words, shut up before the jump, okay? Now, this is optional. You don't have to do that, but from what I've seen, most vendors do it. Most vendors say, we're going to jump in 8 beacons or 3 beacons, but everybody be quiet until we do the jump, please, okay? But not every vendor does that. But usually you'll see that be a value of 1, okay? So everybody be quiet, and then we're going to jump to the new channel. Okay. Now, there is a way for clients to report up on radar detection as well. It's called in-service monitoring. So, and this is optional as well. So basically what a client does is if it hears a radar pulse, it can report up to the AP, the master device, and it's saying, hey, I heard a radar pulse in our basic service area. Maybe you should tell everybody to jump. And then it'll still be up to the AP to tell everybody to jump. This is optional. I haven't seen this yet, so if anybody ever gets a frame capture of this, please send it to me, and I'm sure Peter McKenzie would like a copy as well. It's optional, but I have not seen that happen yet. There's also something called off-channel CAC time. It's definitely defined in the European Union, and I haven't quite figured out what vendors are doing here in the United States with this, but I've seen this behavior. It's basically, let's say I'm an AP, I'm on channel 100. I can reevaluate other DFS channels while I'm still transmitting on 100. And it's different depending on the channels in Europe. But basically, in other words, maybe I'm on channel 100 and I might need to do a future jump, but I want to do a future jump to another DFS channel. And if I want to do a future jump to another DFS channel, I need to know that it is clear of radar as well. So I'll have to listen for a full 60 seconds, but it'll be cumulative. And so you can see there's different time frames for most channels. It's you could do an evaluation anywhere between 6 and 4 hours to get that cumulative 60 minutes of evaluation. And it's a little bit different for the TDWR channels. But this would allow APs to jump from one DFS to another as long as they know that it's clear. As a matter of fact, I looked at a log file to see that actually happened right here. So you see an AP that's on channel 60, and they detect the radar, okay? So it decides it's going to switch, and it wants to switch to another DFS channel, but it's evidently already knows that that DFS channel is clear because it's already done some monitoring in advance. And you can see at the very top of that screen, it says skip the CAC. We don't need, it's a 0 duration, and we can go ahead and we can jump to channel 132, which is another DFS channel, okay? But it depends. You might see them jump to DFS channels. Very often you'll see them jump to non-DFS channels. But if they're going to jump to another DFS channel, there's going to have to be some pre-monitoring. Now, once an AP and client switch to that DFS channel, they cannot return to either whatever channel they switch to, whether it's DFS or non-DFS, they cannot return to their original DFS channel for 30 minutes. This is known as the non-occupancy time. And you can actually see that right here. Once again, I had an AP change, and its original channel was 60, and it's basically saying, if you look there at the bottom, it's saying, hey, you know what? The non-occupancy time is over. We can go back to our original channel, and then that's exactly what it does. It goes back to channel 60. But it has to wait a full 30 minutes before it can do that, and that is the rules. Okay. Now, obviously, when it jumps back to, what does it have to do before it jumps back? It's going to have to listen again, right? It's going to have to pre-evaluate that channel. So let's talk about that. Okay. So there's something called Zero-Wait-DFS. One way is, I guess there's different ways this could be done, but there's the Broadcom is a chipset vendor and a lot of vendors APs, including Extreme. And Zero-Wait-DFS was initially defined as a method to, while you were on one DFS channel, to go listen to another DFS channel using a separate radio chain. But it could be used as a different way. It could be used as a way of maybe you're already, maybe you've jumped and maybe you're on a non-DFS channel and maybe you could use one of your radio chains to listen ahead of time before you jump back to your original DFS channel. So let's say I was on channel 100, I jumped to channel 36, and during that 30-minute time, maybe right at the end of that 30-minute time, I could use one radio chain on a 4x4 AP to go listen to the original channel 100, and then that way, once I know it's clear, I could still be servicing my clients back on channel 36 and then jump. Now the thing is I haven't seen vendors do a lot with Zero-Wait-DFS yet. For either its original intended purpose or for what I'm describing right here. But bottom line is it does hold potential. But I haven't seen vendors do a lot with it. I actually have a little video of it right here that very quickly that I'll show you. And that I manually forced Zero-Wait-DFS. I have an AP on channel 36 right here. And basically it's a 4x4 AP. I'm going to start the video. And I'm going to stop it. And I know it might be hard to see, but what it just did right there, it downgraded to a 3x3. And now the other radio chain is now listening on channel 140 for 60 seconds. I'll start the video again, and I start a timer right here. And then you'll see that timer go off. And I'm going to just, in the interest of time, I'm going to get up right up to about 60 seconds. And then right around 60 seconds, you see it get upgraded to a 4x4 again, okay? But it was using the other radio chain to go, while I was servicing all the clients on channel 36 with the 3x3 capability, it was using the fourth radio chain to go listen on channel 140, and channel 140 was clear, and then after of the end of the 30-minute no occupancy time, you'll then actually, because the channel is clear, it could then jump back to its original channel, as well as use a channel switch announcement to tell the clients, let's all go back to our original channel. So it holds a lot of potential, but I haven't seen vendors take full advantage of this yet. Now, what about RRM protocols in DFS? Okay, they need to be aware of DFS, for one thing, and that can be both good and bad. What you're actually seeing right here is an RRM protocol has been informed of a DFS event, and it changes, what it does is it effectively changes the cost factor of that channel. So when any other APs boot up or are evaluating the RF environment, the cost factor of that DFS channel is being communicated to all the APs, bottom line, so that they will not use that channel as well. So when new APs boot up, or live APs, that they will be aware of this as well. So it will affect both immediate and future RRM decisions. Now there can be some downside to RRM and DFS too, because when an AP changes channels and it goes to another group of channels, what could possibly happen to the APs that are nearby that? So let's say I go from 100 to 36, but then I have other APs near that. What could possibly happen with some RRM? They could start changing channels as well, okay, depending on how it is. Now, some other things that I didn't discuss in Prague that I wanted to discuss here is this. What about 40 megahertz, or for that matter, 80 megahertz in DFS, okay? So there's primary and there's secondary channels. And you know that with 40 megahertz, you're going to have your primary channel, then you're going to have your secondary channel. And then with 80 megahertz, there's 3 secondary channels. I did a little testing with 40 megahertz. I didn't do 80 megahertz testing because I don't care about 80 megahertz, and I hope the rest of you don't either. But the bottom line is, what I wanted to know is, number one, what would happen if the radar pulse was on the secondary channel, because here's the question. CA uses different energy detect thresholds on the secondary channel than the primary channel, okay? Just for interference in general. So my worry was, what happens if there's a radar pulse in the secondary channel? Will it not jump? And most of the testing that we did, we saw that it did detect it on the secondary channel, and they still would jump. So that was good. I was happy by that. I lied a little bit. I did test one vendor on an 80 megahertz channel, and on like the furthest secondary channel, I tested it, and it didn't jump. Okay, so another reason not to use 80 megahertz channels. But 40 megahertz was pretty good. But there's other things to think about here. So look at this right here. I have a 40 megahertz channel. All right, and then there's a radar event, and it doesn't matter whether it was detected on primary or secondary, it jumped. But this vendor went from a 40 to a 40 in the jump, okay, after the radar event, okay? And then after the 30-minute non-occupancy time, it went back to the 40 megahertz channel, its original one, on DFS. But here's another vendor. This vendor was on 40, okay, but then it jumped to a non-DFS 20. And then after the 30 minutes, it went back to the 40. So which do you think is better? Well, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. You know, maybe you're trying to maintain a 40 to 40, but think about if you did a 40 to 40 jump, when you're jumping to an area, and now you're affecting a bunch of other APs nearby it with more frequency space. If you go from a 40 to a 20, at least maybe the impact on especially the RRM algorithms isn't as obstructive. So what I'd like to see vendors do, I don't know if any of them are doing this yet, I haven't seen it yet, is maybe give you the option for this. But we saw different vendors do it different way. Okay, but I would love to see vendors give you the option that if you're jumping from 40 to maybe jump to 20 as well. Can DFS be flexible? So there's this one vendor that makes claims that you can do this, that if you have an 80 megahertz channel and then it's one of the secondary channels is hit, what they'll then do is instead of jumping to a whole new channel, they'll just kind of size down the channel that wasn't affected by the radar pulse, okay? I'm calling BS on this, okay? And now, in all fairness, I did not have, I tested this vendor, but I didn't have full time to test this. But you know what this is? This is 802.11 AC dynamic bandwidth operation. Does anybody remember that? 802.11 AC, there was a lot of marketing hype about how radios could go from 80 to 40 to 80 to 40 to 20, and every vendor has a setting to change that. How many of you ever gotten that to work very, very well? Okay, so basically, I admire them for being creative, but basically what they're trying to do is combine DFS detection with dynamic bandwidth operation, but I think it's mainly just marketing hype. And what I'm more worried about is, I don't care who the vendor is, I'm more worried about with 40 megahertz, whether the primary or the secondary is hit, in this case the primary is hit, and then of course you're not going to be able to transmit on either the 40 or the 20, but then what happens is this. You might see an RRM algorithm do a minus offset with a 40 megahertz channel, and now you have primary and secondary channels stepping on each other. And I don't know how many of you guys know of the danger of that, but when you have overlap of primary and secondary channels with different 40 megahertz channels, it'll bring your network to a crawl, an absolute crawl. So we've seen some RRM algorithms do this, and some bad design do this statically. I haven't seen this happen with DFS yet, but the potential's there, and I'm worried about that. Another thing I really like is the ability to have a fallback channel. So quick plug for my company, Extreme. The Wing APs have this capability. I'd like to see it for our other APs as well as other vendors do this, where you could choose, in this case, an order of priority, which channels you would like the APs to potentially fall back to if a radar event was detected. And a good one would be channel 165, because a lot of people don't use channel 165 in their channel plan, and then it wouldn't affect a lot of your other nearby APs. So at least having the ability to do this is kind of nice. How about dual 5 gigahertz and DFS? So Extreme and other vendors all offer dual 5 gigahertz. It's been quite the winner for Extreme. So in this case, you see an SDR radio. You see two radios, one on 36 and one on 100. What you don't want to happen, I think I have this animation backwards. Pretend that one's the SDR radio 2. If you hear a DFS, what you don't want to happen is it to go from channel 100 to channel 40. Because then you would have one radio on channel 36 and one on 40, and you cannot have radios that close in the same AP. You have to have about an 80 megahertz of separation between the frequencies of the two radios on the AP, otherwise they'll interfere with each other on the AP. So I did some testing on this earlier this week, and bottom line, this is the way we do it. So in this case right here, I had, you can see, an AP on channel 100. As soon as it detected the DFS on the SDR radio on channel 100, it gave it a very high cost, obviously, and had to move. But look what it also did. It gave a very, very high cost to the uniband, Uni 1 channels, where the other radio was on channel 36. And the reason it did that is it didn't want that radio that was changing, okay, to jump into the same uniband as the other radio in the same AP, because that would be not a happy day. So this is important. This is very important, okay? All right, quickly. What about DFS and Voice? Make sure you're using 802.11k, okay, because those clients don't do probing, okay, on the DFS channel. They got to know where to be able to roam. Our friends at Vocera did a really good presentation about this topic in Prague, and they even make recommendations not to use all the DFS channels, just to use a set number of DFS channels. But 802.11k will absolutely help clients with DFS, and especially for voice. Uh-oh, did my thing die? Okay. Quickly, so what about outdoor APs and DFS? Should you use it? Depends on, you guys tell me. I've seen some vendors that are actually making recommendations not to use the DFS channels on point-to-point links, okay? I've also, how about with mesh? Mesh is it's a WDS, right? And it's a WDS solution. So does a vendor send a channel switch announcement to the mesh, from the mesh portal to the mesh point? My guess is a lot of vendors don't, okay? And I can actually confirm that, okay? So those are some things you need to think about, that maybe that DFS is not necessarily a good thing for mesh. And we all know the biggest problem with is what? With DFS. The biggest problem is false positives. Okay, so in other words, if a bird flaps its wings in the air, it can be misinterpreted, and that now you have as a radar event, and now you have APs changing channels. So I'm going to be very honest here. Every vendor has this problem. When I was working for Aerohive, we had all sorts of problems about 6 years ago. We've gotten them all straightened out, and every vendor, by the way, every vendors have these problems I'm getting ready to describe, but there's our sad puppy again, okay? You have false positives. You have radar pulse thresholds that are too sensitive. We did something really stupid. Remember that 7th radar pulse that you don't have to worry about? Well, we detected for that, and we didn't need to. So once again, a bird would flap its wings through the air, and our APs would jump. And then you see vendors that would jump to a channel, all jump to the same channel. Most vendors now will move around between the different channels, okay, and not jump just to one channel. And then sometimes you'll see vendors that'll jump to a channel but never return to their original DFS channel. I might have seen that at a hotel in Phoenix somewhere. So I'm sorry, this broke. Okay, so vendor implementations, though, have improved over years, or have they? So why is this puppy so happy? Because it's DFS demo time. Okay, so give me just a second. All right, so I have an AP right here. It's on channel 60, okay? And I need this. This is the little toy we'll talk about in just a second. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, so I'm going to use Air Tool to do a packet capture on channel 60. And here we go. And okay, don't you love it when demos don't work? Yeah. Oh, come on, really? All right, let's take a look at it. The same thing happened in Prague. I mean, I do this 100 times, it works every time the first time. All right, let's just try it again. We'll try it one more time, and if not, I'll just move on. Capturing it. One more try, very quickly. Okay. All right, it's either, I don't know why I'm having trouble, guys. Try one more thing. Okay. Oh, now. Y'all be nice. Okay. All right. Did it move? All right. Okay. So, all right, it moved. Let me do a refresh here. Okay. Or we'll look at it in Wi-Fi Explorer. Yeah, it moved to 108. So I apologize for that. I didn't get the packet capture. But you can see it clearly moved to 108, right? Okay. So and it actually, and it should refresh in my management solution here in a minute as well. Now, so let's move back to the slides because I got about 8 minutes, and we'll get right back here. Okay. So what is this? This is the Wi-Fi Channel Metrics tool. When I debuted this in Prague, it was just a prototype. Now, what this is, it's the ability to do radar simulation. Okay, and it is available now for purchase. You can. Keith has a bunch of them in the store, and it's also available at the Nuts About Nets website. So I've already talked to about 8 of you that have already bought one in the last day or two. But it is well worth the money. You saw it work. Okay, I apologize for the packet capture didn't work. But it's, you can select all the DFS channels. It has, including the 6 radar waveform types. It has different modes where you can do where you can just be on the one radar type, or you can traverse across all of them when you're transmitting with this little guy. And it is available from our friends about Nuts About Nets. Okay, and it is live and available for sale right now. So let me give you a quick couple of examples right here of some testing we did and over the last year, back with prototypes and then eventually with the final device. Vendor A right here is using 2 action frames. So this is what I was going to show you in a packet capture, but I have screenshots here. So vendor A used 2 action frames, channel switch mode of 1, so they told all the clients to be quiet, right? Okay, and then they did a channel switch count in 6 beacons, and you can see it count down in 6 beacons. And the clients, and I also saw if the clients would follow, and they did. Vendor B did it, and I did 3 different tests. They didn't use action frames, okay? They only had the channel switch announcements in 3 beacons, okay? And then they moved, in this case, from channel 46 to channel 48, a non-DFS channel. I don't particularly care for this, and the reason I don't like about it is all these vendors are doing this under a second. So to me, you need at least 8 or 9 channel switch count of at least 8 or 9. Because now think about this: what if you heard a channel switch announcement of, but there was a channel switch announcement, but those frames were corrupted? What happened to the clients? they didn't hear the channel switch, right? So that's why having at least 7 or 8 or 9 beacons is actually a good thing in my mind, because you're pretty much guaranteeing that the clients will hear the channel switch announcement and then they'll move to the new channel. But you're seeing here is that every vendor does this different. So right here, here's another example right here. 2 action frames, and they counted 2 beacons, and then they just jumped. Okay, so to me, once again, that is not enough. Okay, but that's just what the vendor did. Here's a good, interesting one. 1 action frame. The channel switch mode was 0, so the clients still have the availability to transmit, right? But look at the beacon switch count too, 0. And in each beacon, it counted down 5 or 6 beacons, but then in each beacon it's saying the channel switch count is 0. So what do you think's happening here? Anytime a client hears one of those beacons, right, what does the client do? It jumps. But where's the AP? It's still on the original channel. So what are the clients now doing on the new channel? They're like, where's my AP? So what do you think they might do? They might roam, right? So this is horrible, okay? And here's a really sad puppy. This vendor C, we tried it over and over and over, didn't respond to any radar signatures as well at both high and low power levels. And this vendor was DFS certified. Just didn't work. So that's very sad. Okay, and this is my favorite one, vendor D, 2 action frames, 10 beacon count. It was on a DFS channel that was 20 megahertz, and look what it did. Went to 80 megahertz. Woohoo! Okay, now, you see a little problem with that? All right, now, so we couldn't believe it. It went from a 20 to 80, and that obviously is bad, because that'll completely mess up your channel plan, and you don't want to be using 80 anyway. We even called up the vendor, and they confirmed it. It was their stupid RRM algorithm that was screwing it up. That being said, I got to give kudos to that vendor. That was a competitor. They fixed it, because we tested it in later firmware, and they fixed it. And so now it goes 20 to 20. To me, this is a really good example right here. This is a great example. 2 action frames, 10 beacons, and then it jumps. Great example, okay? So let's make some conclusions and some observations as we're winding down here. Vendors implement channel switch announcements and channel moves differently. They all do it differently. They get certified, but you're going to see that they do it differently. AP models from the same vendor don't always yield the same results. Different AP models from the same vendor might perform differently, okay? And changes in firmware from a vendor might actually affect your channel switch announcements and move time. Vendors will also perform differently in how they jump from 40 megahertz channels. RRM algorithms, for the most part, should be aware and affected by DFS, both positively but also negatively. And by the way, not all clients obey channel switch announcements. They should, they're supposed to, but you won't always see that, okay? Everybody loves this, right? Mr. Albano's site right here for clients. Everybody loves this. So we have a call to action. We started this call to action back in Prague. There hadn't been a lot done yet because the WiFiMetrix isn't available. Now that every one of you is probably going to go buy one of these things, now the DFS project is much like Mike's project, where you're going to be able to take your packet captures with your DFS testing and upload it to the DFS project and share with the community. So this is a very sharing community. Let's all share on the DFS project as well, please. Just for I used right here, I'm just showing you that I used the WiFiMetrix radar simulator. I used AirTool for packet captures and Wireshark, and also Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. I do want to put in a quick plug for my company. Most vendors don't give a lot of visibility to DFS, and this has been a big complaint of mine for years. I will say that in our cloud management platform, we do give visibility now to DFS events, pretty immediate, and we can show when they happen and when the channel changed. Most vendors, you have to dig into their log files, so I challenge all vendors to give better visibility into DFS. Okay, and we've had this now for about 6 months here at Extreme. And obviously, these are Lee Badman's favorite buzzwords, machine learning and AI. Every vendor is doing this or has a path to that. And I can tell you right now, we're doing some machine learning on DFS, and you'll see that actually find its way into the product soon. Okay, so just imagine this. Imagine this hotel decided to put in extreme APs. Okay, but based on what it had learned about all the other extreme customers in this nearby area, it said, oh, don't use channel 124. So when they stand up these APs, they wouldn't even use 124 from what we've learned from the cloud. Quick thank yous real quick. I want to thank, that's a really good white paper that everybody can read. I want to thank Nigel for his blog and also Lee Badman for his blog. Also the Nuts About Nets people. And finally, I want to thank Mr. Devon because him and I did all this testing over the past years. And I also want to put a plug in for if you haven't heard about his wireless adjuster class. I was lucky enough to attend his beta. It's a very good class, and he's doing a world tour. So if you get a chance to learn about troubleshooting, it's a really good class, and I would challenge you to attend that. And once again, the challenge is the DFS project, and there's a lot of things that you can learn with that tool. So thank you very much, and I'm out of time. Okay, almost.